Our guest today on the show is the new Premier of British Columbia. BC NDP leader John Horgan was sworn into office in July. He joined the show during the election and joins us today to discuss a couple of key issues for the first time since taking his new role. Premier Horgan, thank you very much for joining us on BIV.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Premier, I just wanted to ask about softwood lumber. You spent a couple of days in Washington recently meeting with the Commerce Secretary and the Trade Secretary. I just wanted to get your sense of how that went. What did you come back with from those meetings? Any optimism that we might see some kind of a negotiated resolution?
Well, it was a very positive trip for me. I made a commitment during the election campaign and after to make sure that the government led by me was front and center with respect to softwood in our negotiations as a country, Canada to the U.S., but also making sure that the federal government understood that British Columbia is the dominant player in the softwood market in the United States. Well over 50% of the product that makes its way to the U.S. market comes from British Columbia. And so we need to be at the table understanding the issues and making sure that our American partners understand how important free and fair trade is to British Columbia. So I met firstly with the Prime Minister and had a teleconference with the Minister Freeland and laid out our concerns as a province after consultation with representatives from the forest sector. And then, of course, David Emerson, our emissary on softwood, the former international trade minister and the individual who negotiated the last softwood deal, also a former forest executive, critically important to our success on the file. He joined me in Ottawa and Washington, and we met, as you said, with Secretary Wilbur Ross and Trade Ambassador Robert Lighthizer. And Lighthizer is focused on the NAFTA discussions currently, and Mr. Ross has been charged with resolving softwood, and both of them left David Emerson and I with the impression that their objective was to have the softwood deal resolved in the interest of all parties before we got deeply into the NAFTA negotiations. So I'm hopeful that that can be translated into some potential success in the weeks ahead. Certainly there's the deadline for the beginning of the NAFTA talks. I believe it's the 16th of August. But there's also the timing of the final determination of what the tariffs, the final duties will be, and that comes sometime in mid-September. So I think that we've got 4 to 6 weeks of intense discussion ahead of us, and I'm hopeful we'll get an agreement that meets the needs of forest workers and forest companies here in BC.
You mentioned David Emerson. He was, of course, appointed as BC's envoy under your predecessor. And we actually had an in-depth radio, video, print interview scheduled with him. He had to cancel because he said there's a new government in place and we were redirected to the Premier's office. So you mentioned his critical role in these discussions. Does this mean that Mr. Emerson is going to remain BC's representative on this issue moving forward?
Yes, that's correct. David and I got a chance when he was first appointed by the previous government. I said publicly that I couldn't think of a better person. He and John Allen, who's also on the file, a former deputy minister and a former negotiator on softwood, I couldn't think of two better people to have representing BC's interests. I said that publicly, and when it became apparent that I would get the opportunity to form a government, I reached out to Mr. Emerson and asked him if he would stay on, and he agreed to do so. And having the opportunity to travel with him to Ottawa and Washington, we talked about a range of issues. He's an extraordinary British Columbian and very, very helpful to me in the transition from the old government to the new. And I've asked him to stay on, and he's agreed to do that. I'm very excited about that.
I just wanted to ask about legislation that we might see in the next, say, 6 months. And the reason I asked that is that Christy Clark's resignation has sort of given this bit of runway, I guess, to be able to pass some legislation without too much problems. You know, there would be the concern about the speaker having to break tie votes and that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering if there are any key pieces of legislation that you might not have planned to get to right away that you might maybe fast track. And I'm thinking, for example, a bill to eliminate the secret ballot voting, or maybe legislation on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, that sort of thing. Any key pieces of legislation that you might try to get fast-tracked, given that you have this runway?
No, I have no intention of amending my behavior based on what the BC Liberals do. They're now embroiled in a leadership contest, and I wish them all well in that. I have been focused from the day the Lieutenant Governor asked me to form a government until today and beyond, with making sure that we're providing good government to British Columbia. And we ran on a platform of making sure that services were there for people, that costs were reduced wherever possible. Issues around tolling, for example, we're going to bring forward. But at an early opportunity, we've talked about increasing disability rates and income assistance rates. We've already taken action on that. When it comes to the legislature, we're going to be looking first and foremost at legislation to get big money out of politics. We're going to look at the Lobby Registration Act. We're going to look at electoral reform. These are all initiatives that we had agreed with the Green Caucus, so they're going to be front and center in the early days of the coming legislative session. But the most important thing we need to do is pass a budget. We're now heading towards September. I know it's early August now, but the summer is getting away on us. School will be back in. We'll have to address the requirements of the Supreme Court ruling against the BC Liberals to make sure that we have appropriate resources in classrooms so that kids get the education they need. But what happens with the Liberals has not ever been a factor for me. I believe that a majority is a majority. Our members will be present. The Green Caucus members have agreed to support us on confidence motions. And I think what I'd like to see in the coming session is a genuine effort by all members of the legislature, regardless of their political party, to speak freely and candidly about the issues that matter to their communities. And none of us envisioned 6 months ago that we would have the worst fire season in 6 decades, but that's going to have a profound impact on our budgeting. It's going to have a profound impact on a whole range of issues, certainly people and property front and center right now with evacuations in communities. But the impact on the economy, whether it be tourism, agriculture, forestry, these are enormous sectors in rural BC, and the summer is the best time to make hay, as they say, and that's been compromised significantly. So rather than worry about how we're going to move forward with our agenda, I'm going to make sure that we're dealing with issues as they emerge, like the fire season, but also implementing our plan to the extent possible in the legislature as I would have otherwise.
Well, one other question. I was just wondering on Trans Mountain. I think it's been acknowledged now that the issuing of permits and that sort of thing is a statutory decision to be made by civil servants, according to the law, not a political decision. But have you figured out what tools you might use legally to halt the expansion of the pipeline?
George Heyman and David Eby are the two ministers charged with addressing Kinder Morgan and Trans Mountain from a legal and from a permitting perspective, both as AG and Minister of Environment. And I'm expecting a briefing from them next week, and they're going to bring that forward to the public once I've had a review of the material that they've assembled. But I made it clear in my meeting with the Prime Minister that we are going to agree to disagree on this file. I believe that Trans Mountain presents a significant challenge to our coast and to our economic viability in the Lower Mainland coming out of Burrard Inlet. And so we talked instead about all of the things that we agree on, making sure that infrastructure investments can happen in a timely way, that we can work on housing and childcare and fentanyl. These are issues where there's a mutual benefit to federal and provincial governments. And both the Prime Minister and I felt that there was so much we agreed on that it was better to start our relationship on that positive footing. But as the summer unfolds and we get into the fall, I'm sure that we'll have complete information for you and your listeners on how we plan to proceed with Trans Mountain.
And in the time we have left, Premier, you mentioned housing. Of course, that was a critical issue in this last provincial election. There are reports that the foreign buyers tax, along with the homeowners loan program implemented by the BC Liberals, are both under review. Is it possible that Metro Vancouver might see the 15% foreign buyers tax actually repealed?
Well, I don't expect that there's going to be significant change there, but all incoming governments review the policies, particularly those that are recent, like those issues around the loan program and the foreign buyers tax. But I want to make sure that we're addressing the main challenges in housing, and they're twofold. There's the speculation in the marketplace, revenues or monies raised in other markets coming here and distorting this market. That's been a fundamental challenge, and we want to make sure we're using whatever tools are necessary to curb the speculation and allow people to continue to have equity and also have opportunity to get into the market. On the loan program, we want to make sure that it's making sense to people and making sense to the Treasury. And so the Minister of Finance is taking a look at that. But no, our focus is going to be on bringing on more supply, working with developers, working with municipalities, working with BC Housing and other housing advocates to make sure that we're bringing on a range of housing, market-driven housing, rental purpose housing, co-op, social, the whole spectrum. And Selena Robinson's been tasked with that. She's a former city councillor in Coquitlam. She's also responsible for municipal affairs. So we want to make sure that rather than pointing fingers at our municipal partners, we're there to help our municipal partners accelerate permitting to ensure that we can bring on more supply and curb the growth in costs for housing in the Lower Mainland, particularly, but right across BC.
Premier, we appreciate you taking the time to join our program. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again.
You too.
Thank you.
That's Premier John Horgan, Premier, of course, of British Columbia and the leader of the BC NDP party.